We're live. We sure, or we have incompetent people? Yeah, you want to clap?
Oh, I'm not clapping.
Woohoo! Welcome, America, because we know all of America is watching. Good morning. Welcome to Shrink Tank Live, the live morning show from Southeast Psych here in Charlotte, North Carolina. A morning show that is hosted by mental health professionals where we bring on guests. We talk about what's happening in our culture. I'm going to let today's guest introduce himself. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, audience. I'm Jason Allen King. I am a comedian based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm thrilled to be here. You guys have a great thing going on here.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. This is great to have a comedian on because we are going to talk about a lot of the state of comedy. We're going to talk a little bit about Dave Chappelle. We both had the honor of seeing him perform live in Columbia, South Carolina, as he is campaigning for Andrew Yang. And then want to just talk about the overall state of comedy, especially in terms of call out or cancel culture, just PC run amok. And then I definitely, with you here, I want the opportunity for us to talk about Ari Shaffir's
Dun, dun, dun.
video about Kobe Bryant and the ensuing fallout, which I don't know if it's done yet.
Right.
But thank you all for watching. You can comment in, you can like, you can share. We love for you to engage with us during this live morning show. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, Dave Chappelle, and kind of just off the bat, you know, what would you say you are as a Dave Chappelle fan?
I'm a big fan of Dave Chappelle. Yeah, I have been for a long time, since I would say even before his show, before the Dave Chappelle show. I loved him. He was great. I think he's you saw his evolution over the years, and he just keeps getting better and better. Even after his, his episode where he disappeared.
Sure. Kind of went off the grid.
Went off the grid, which I appreciated that, and his comeback was pretty great. Yeah,
Yep.
He's an impressive guy. As of late, I think things have changed a little bit in his response to people's response to his comedy, which has been interesting to watch. But yeah, I'm a big fan. He's awesome.
It was really interesting when the Dave Chappelle show launched, and I'm looking at this comedian. I'm going, isn't that the guy that has like 5 lines in Con Air, and wasn't he in Half Baked? This is the guy that Comedy Central said, let's give him a series. And then I started watching some episodes, and I'm like, I would have had no idea, based upon his little filmography or what I was familiar with, that he had such a sharp and sophisticated approach to comedy. Very biting, very satirical, addressing very weighty topics in such a playful, sometimes sophomoric manner that you have to be brilliant in order to be able to pull that off.
That's what I was going to say. Is I think the best ones, like Norm Macdonald's another example. Where,
I love Norm.
Yeah, where you, at face value, you see almost a simple person, but you dig a little deeper and you see that they're actually talking about pretty weighty things in a very, very smart way, in a way that I would say large groups of people could understand it. And yeah, it's like a Pixar movie.
Yeah.
Well, the kids can watch it and enjoy it, but the parents are also getting those layered, deeper jokes behind it. I
think that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So, give me your take. Had you ever seen Dave live?
No.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, that was the first time. I appreciate the opportunity to go see him.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, what did you think of the show?
Overall, I think it was a great show. I mean, it was. Have we brought up that? I don't know if they were surprise comics or not, but it was amazing. So Michelle Wolf, opened the show.
Michelle Wolf is an opener, right?
Yeah, that was crazy. And then Ashy Larry, what's his? I forget his name though.
Is it
Donnell
Rawlings?
Donnell Rawlings, yeah. Who's been through the Comedy Zone in Charlotte before. I just hadn't seen him. He kind of stole the show a little bit. I mean, they were both fantastic. And then, of course, Dave coming out was just. It was pretty amazing to see him live, I have to say.
Yeah, that was a great triple lineup. I wasn't expecting.
Not at all. Yeah, and they all showed up. There wasn't a dud in the group, I would say. Not that you would think there would be with those people, but yeah, they were great. Michelle, I think I've been wanting to see Michelle Wolf for a long time because she's somebody else who kicks the beehive every once in a while, you know. So it's kind of fun to see that reaction. I think she showed up with that same sort of signature blue humor, you know.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about Michelle Wolf, or just female comedians in general, is they're able to take their comedy in spaces that they can address things and they can disarm topics around women's issues or even just masculinity in such a creative way that a lot of times that it's a bigger kind of minefield for men to do that. And
probably rightfully so.
yeah, and rightfully so. And it's one of those things where I wish more and more men really kind of immerse themselves in female comedians to get that different point of view, sort of, see the creativity, the sophistication, as well as that even if they are, as performers, even if they have their own sort of political platforms or issues, that they also have a sense of humor about it. They're going to use that in some ways to expose the hypocrisy or sometimes the ludicrous nature of certain things in our culture. So I definitely appreciated Michelle Wolf being able to bring that.
And I would say, coming from, I'll say, from the inside, you don't get that sense of a lot of comics feeling that way about female comedians. I think a lot of male comedians, look down their nose at them, and they often don't want to give that platform to female comics. And I think we're seeing that change now.
Yeah.
But women are doing it, clawing their way to get the opportunities that men get. And I should preface this by all the comics who are watching this are now rolling their eyes at me and probably, that's they don't love that attitude. But all that being said, I think you're exactly right. They have a perspective that and an experience that they bring a lot of that to the table that I don't think a lot of guys can really offer. They like to talk about it, but I'm not especially sure they should sometimes. So.
Well, now the reason we were seeing Dave Chappelle, the reason that he was performing here in South Carolina is he's actually campaigning for Andrew Yang. And I was just curious, as somebody that's in the realm of performing arts, acting, film, television, commercials, what's your kind of mindset or perspective of celebrity endorsements when it comes to politics? Whether you have a pulse in that community or just your own personal viewpoint, does political endorsements from celebrities make much of an impact or difference?
I think if they didn't make an impact, they wouldn't be doing it.
Okay.
Right? I would say coming from let's say Andrew Yang's position, he wouldn't. I mean, it's sort of like people getting cast in movies because they have a huge social media following. It's this, to me, it's the same thing. They've chosen that in this example, have chosen a person who has a lot of people who want to hear them talk. They want to hear their opinion on things because they respect them, or they want to just fan out about them, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's probably a very effective tactic. I think in particular with Dave Chappelle, everyone's looking at him all the time. What's he going to do? What's he going to say? So you've got him supporting Andrew Yang. I think there's a lot of Andrew's probably reaching a lot of people that he wouldn't without it. I think so. I would say that I don't have a problem with it either. If that's sort of the question of should celebrities be doing this, I'd say sure, why not? Part of the perk, I think, of being a celebrity is you have a microphone, if you will. So you get to express your opinions, whether they're educated or not to impugn Dave Chappelle or anything, but yeah, good for them.
What's really interesting is I remember Dave Chappelle right after the 2016 presidential election, and he was actually on Saturday Night Live afterwards. And if you recall, there was a skit where basically you watched some white people in this skit just completely outraged that America could elect Donald Trump.
Yes.
And I think it was Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock, and they were in the skit, and they're basically like, dude, this has been our entire life, right? America letting us down, things not going the way that we would hope. And so, and then shortly thereafter, I think he went on one of the evening or the nighttime talk shows, and he basically said, I'm going to give Donald Trump a chance. And that really, in a very short period of time, in 2016, right after the election, that was the first time I ever heard Dave really directly address politics. I mean, a lot of his humor, a lot of his skits is just infused with political discourse, but for him to really directly address the state of the nation, the presidency, things along those lines, I'd never come across anything like that. But it was also in this very, not in this very direct manner. He wasn't really getting himself too involved in the middle.
Right.
So I think what we're seeing a little bit with Dave is an evolution that maybe is happening with a lot of America, where in 2016 or right before then, there probably was a lot of Americans that were very casual in their engagement or advocacy of politics. I don't know if we ever talked about this, but in 2016, in October, I went to a Donald Trump rally as a joke here in
I'm going to
Charlotte,
go ahead
North.
and go.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding, of course.
So
I don't care.
I did up Asians for Trump, and I printed out all types of T-shirts and other stuff like that. And I went as a joke at the time, thinking there's no way this guy, like America, would ever elect him. And
Right.
obviously the joke was on me.
It was on all of us, you know.
But like Dave Chappelle, I think myself and a lot of Americans over the last few years have recognized that if we want real change, that we're going to have to get off the sidelines and really make our voice and our advocacy matter and count. And so for him, I heard him talk about Andrew Yang. Why Andrew Yang? And he said, this guy's got a lot of great ideas. And he doesn't think that the media is covering him. They think that the media is ignoring him because all of the oxygen in the room is being sucked up by some of the more prominent, well-known, established Democrats like Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren. And he's like, people need to listen to this guy.
Yeah.
This guy's got a lot of smart things to say. And I will say, Andrew Yang is one smart dude if you hear him talk. And so I can see why Dave Chappelle, who I think is one of the smartest comedians, not just smart comedy, one of the smartest human beings that's in the field of comedy, why someone like Andrew Yang would really resonate with him.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that Dave has these small snippets of video where he's talking about Andrew Yang, he's promoting Andrew Yang, and then he's campaigning, or in a lot of ways he did a fundraiser for Andrew Yang that we saw in Columbia, and then he did it the next night in Charleston. But they didn't appear on the stage together. So Dave didn't go do his 1 hour comedy bit and then have Andrew Yang come out. And I got to believe some of that was to allow Dave Chappelle to be Dave Chappelle on stage with all of his crudity, with all of his un-PC, his rough.
Imagine Andrew Yang saying, "No, I don't want to get that close to it." Right?
Yeah.
And I would say part of the reason why I think Chappelle's doing this is you get to a certain level, certain status. I don't think you have a choice but to have your opinion splashed all over everything. So there was a certain point, there's a certain level, I think, that he was going to get to, that he was going to have to be in some way comment on politics.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And I think his comedy is really more often about social issues and social inequities and things like that. And I think he just brings a light to that. And I think he got to a certain point where politics was the very natural progression of that. But I think you're right. Not seeing them on stage at the same time wasn't by accident.
Yeah. I mean, and like Dave Chappelle, everyone wants to know your and our opinions about everything. So I can certainly relate and sympathize with Dave Chappelle, everybody wanting to know what you think, right? Give them direction in their lives.
Yes, that's right.
But I also think that it would have been a very weird juxtaposition to have Dave Chappelle going on, joking about infidelity, joking about transgender, and then immediately have Andrew Yang come up and talk about the issues that really matter on the larger landscape.
Well, you bring up a good point, because I don't really know of too many other politicians historically, not that I have that knowledge in my head, but they have endorsements by stand-up comics.
Yeah, I mean, and even if they do, the idea of going and not just rallying for them or campaigning for them, but doing a comedy set to raise money for him. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about not just maybe the show that we went to, not just seeing Dave Chappelle, although he can be a lightning rod for us to talk about the state of comedy right now when it comes to offensive humor or un-PC humor. Dave Chappelle is really, in a lot of ways, like you said earlier on, there's a spotlight on Dave Chappelle. And in some ways, he's doubled down or leaned in on that, addressing a lot of controversial topics, transgender, calling out. In our show, he differentiated between white feminists and black feminists, and a lot of areas that even liberal people might find his humor kind of uncomfortable, offensive.
Well, of course, liberal people found it offensive. That's sort of their platform now, is to be offended on behalf of everybody. So
and so I'm curious, as a comedian that operates in that world, not just as a consumer of comedy, but somebody that is creating that art form and that platform
Mm-hmm.
himself. What have you sort of noticed about the state of comedy and our overall culture that there
Right.
definitely seems to be a rise in sensitivity?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a mouthful and a tall order to talk about that. But just to use, first of all, I think it's a risk for Andrew Yang to have Michelle Wolf and Dave Chappelle have a fundraiser for them, for fear of that association, because of how controversial, in particular, Dave Chappelle has been about the transgender community, as you mentioned. So I should sort of preface all this by saying that I'm not an especially blue comic. I don't really push politics or anything like that. That's just not the kind of humor that I do. So I do sort of full transparency about that. Yes, the liberal side of the country now is definitely more sensitive to the feelings and concerns of, I would say, fringe groups, underrepresented groups.
Some of the marginalized demographics.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of this comes from a good place to say things need to change a little bit. And in change, I think it's how we talk about some of these things, who represents these things, so they want to protect them. And I think the pendulum has swung it swung pretty far the other direction, to where now some of those things have suddenly become off limits. And I think the purists in comedy would say that being able to laugh at something takes some of the power away from some of these negative things. But the place we're at right now, people don't want to do that because maybe they feel we're not ready. Maybe they feel like it's the people who are laughing about it aren't coming or speaking from a place that fully represents or understands that plight, and therefore they say no. I use Nanette. There was that special that came out. Part of my issue with stand-up comedy and how people want to say, I get to make fun of whatever I want to, right? Especially, I would say, male comics, right? Chappelle said, I could make fun of transgender all day long. While I think theoretically that's true, I think that community probably wants someone who really knows their position and their play better to do it. Nanette comes in and does her show, and people, it's so widely just adored how powerful that was. You have a lot of comics or male comics say that's not comedy. That's a one-woman show. So they kind of pull the rug out from under her from their perspective and saying, no, she doesn't. That's not even comedy, right? I look at Chappelle and his last special, to me, was a response to how much grief he got for the special before that, when he was making fun of transgender people. Now, I'm not saying that he can't, and I'm not saying any comic out there, yeah, you can make fun of whatever you want. You can make all the jokes in the world, but there's those rules, right? The number one rule is it's got to be funny.
Yeah.
And it's got to, it can't be hate-filled. I think that's just sort of a unwritten rule. If it's hate-filled and you're somehow drawing hate from other people who are going to do something, of course, no, don't do that. I think that's just a common sense. Right?
Sure.
My issue with Dave, and he spent the first how many minutes going into this transgender
like 20,
thing again.
25 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a significant portion of his set.
That was him, as you said earlier. He doubled down on that perspective, and his special to me it came out very quickly. I feel like it maybe wasn't quite, and I want to specify, I am a huge Dave Chappelle fan, so I hold him to a very high standard. That last special, in the first half of it, I didn't think was polished enough for how weighty that topic was, and how much grief it felt like him. It felt like he was, he got slapped on the wrist and he was coming back and he was doubling down and saying "screw you," basically.
Yeah.
Which I didn't think that was that great. I didn't think it was especially funny. I thought he just came out and just wanted to get his opinion out there. So to me, he didn't go to one of the golden rules of saying it's got to be funny. And I thought when he came out last night, while he went back to that topic of transgender, I felt like it was much more polished. I felt like you saw his opinion better thought out, better delivered. I still think he, was laying into it pretty hard, and I think some people would probably have been offended by it. But I at least felt like he went back to the roots of making it funny, and that, I still question whether or not why do you need to do that?
Sure.
Why is that topic so important to Dave? And I would say it's because the audience didn't respond to it and gave him a hard time about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I actually was of the minority opinion around here in Shrink Tank that I didn't find a lot of his recent specials to be as quality that Dave in the past have. And I kind of maybe had some of those same sensibilities that it didn't feel as sharp. It didn't feel as layered, which a lot of his comedy does, to where you go back and you think about the construction of the story and the punchline.
Right.
It felt like just a conversation. I felt like he was processing what he had been confronted with rather than it really was a fully formed comedic concept. And so I agree. The other night when he calls back talking about his fan, the transgender friend and comedian in San Francisco, that Dave is at his best when he merges his provocative or incendiary humor with an element of humanism. So you see that human aspect, and it creates that. I think it creates this incongruency where it's hard to just immediately label him as hateful when he's juggling back and forth between the humanity and the humor of something.
Sure.
And I think he did that much better in the show we just saw than some of his recent specials. I have a theory about Dave Chappelle, and it's totally a theory, and most likely if anyone ever watches this show, they're going to get a bunch of comments saying...
He's transgender.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no, that's not it.
Sorry, they're going to give me a whole bunch of grief of like, you know nothing about Dave Chappelle, and you're right, I don't. But I think Dave, he is so well-versed in the history of America and the unresolved tension and just ridiculously horrific history of America and Black America. And I think Dave, in a lot of ways, uses his comedy to create outrage and protest for his humor. And in some ways, he challenges people to have perspective of like, are you really that upset and offended by this, by a joke? Because a lot of his sets will talk about 40, 50 minutes of just the hypocrisy and the shameful history of America. He'll do it in a humorous way, but I feel like sometimes he's setting people up to like get them to feel offended, get them to feel upset, all the while saying like, I'm joking about race relations in America and you guys are laughing at it.
Right.
I make a joke about a transgender bar and you're completely, up in arms about that. Really? Right. It's almost like now, and I think a lot of his outrage, that it's almost like he doesn't care is kind of the wealthy white Americans that are in his audience, and in some ways he's like, you haven't earned the right to be outraged or upset by anything. So if I offend you, like, I'm sorry, not sorry.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not he has crossed a line, because I will say, a Dave Chappelle special, a Dave Chappelle show. I will always laugh, and there will always be something I cringe about or go like,
sure,
ooh, Dave, did anyone see me laugh at that? That type of thing. And this show is no different.
Yeah, I think that he is the purest form of comics who want to do exactly that. This, the PC culture that's now being offended by things. He's the perfect example of that, I think. That, yes, you want to find the line and you want to, put your toe on the other side of it, and that is to work people up. And I think that's 100% true. I have a bigger issue with younger and less experienced comics, or comics who simply go shock value, things like that, where, yeah, you're allowed to do it, but there are consequences to doing that. And the people who yell the loudest are the ones who don't approach it from, like you just said, where Dave's coming from a wealth of knowledge. He's coming from a place of educating people and calling people out and making people think about things. Whereas I think there's so many other comics out there who they're about as deep as a puddle, and they're just out there to make people cringe without the I'm going to think about this.
Sure.
Without making him think about it. So you can't claim free speech, and then the next sentence say, well, they're just words.
Yeah.
That I hear that those two arguments in the same sentence so often, where it's like that it doesn't. You, as a comedian, you are not completely insulated from consequence.
Sure.
So if you're going to use a free speech, then have something of substance to what you're talking about. That's my sort of request of comics,
Well, and that's a great segue. I got a comedian here. I want to talk about this recent development in the comedy community about Ari Shaffir's Kobe Bryant video and the comments surrounding his death and then the ensuing uproar. And for those that aren't familiar, Ari Shaffir is a Jewish comic, and I believe it was the day of Kobe's death, he posted a video where he called it a great day. He said, Kobe Bryant died 23 years too late today. He got away with rape because all the Hollywood liberals who attack comedy enjoy rooting for the Lakers more than they dislike rape. Big ups to the hero who forgot to gas up his chopper. I hate the Lakers. What a great day. And as you can imagine, a lot of people found a lot to be upset and offended over that video post. And so from what I know, he's been dropped by his talent agency. He's lost a lot of gigs that have been canceled. And a lot of people even in the comedy world have really
a lot of comedians have come out
and condemned him for that. And then he went back and he said, this is a shtick I do when any celebrity dies because I want to take the air out of the room because that's when they're at their most worshipped in our culture.
Right.
And he also explained that he didn't know at the time that his daughter or other children or people had perished in this crash. But what are your thoughts about the Ari Shaffir video and the fallout?
Yeah, one of the best arguments I hear about comics who are under attack for things like this is just because you don't find something funny doesn't mean that other people do find it funny. So I would say that Ari Shaffir, Big J. Okerson, I think the Legions of Skank, those guys and their audience appreciate the most foul and blue comedy that there is. That being said, I feel like there's still I hate to use the word like decorum, but the idea of doing that as immediate as he did, I think it was just a major miscalculation. That's just not the kind of humor that I especially enjoy, but there are people who do. I don't even want for a second to come off sounding like I support that because I don't in any way. And I think that this idea of well, he's going to get canceled, this cancel culture, as we talked about, it's like, I'm sorry, if you're dumb enough to be that tone deaf and to not understand the implications of that, well, then you don't belong doing what you're doing.
Sure.
I mean, that's my take on it. How could you have possibly done that and expect anyone to accept you, at the very least, on a mass scale, where you get to travel the country and do this for a living? No, you just forfeited 75% of the country by making that kind of a statement. More than that, probably. Yeah. I'm of the opinion that was. To say it's a miscalculation isn't even strong enough, I think. Like, why do that? I don't care if your fans are doing it. At least give it some time, right? Then don't they say tragedy plus time equals comedy, right? Well, they didn't even have all of the information out before he was doing that. So if he wants to use that as an example of saying, oh, well, I didn't know. It's like, well, again, that's your own miscalculation. It's your own fault for doing that. I thought it was so incredibly in bad taste. And, yeah, and think of the people that would defend him, I would say, or the people I was talking about earlier. Show me the value in that.
Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld has a great quote when they were talking about, I can't remember what the special was. It was on HBO, and they were talking about the N-word. And he said, I don't find the humor in that, nor do I seek it. He's not saying that other people can't. That's the same to me as an example of this. It's like, I don't find the humor in what he's doing. I don't seek the humor in that. And for the very, very small group of people that guy was performing for, I would say there are consequences to that, and he's suffering them right now, and rightfully so. My other thing, if I may, I can't quite wrap my head around this idea where comedians are they comedians 24 hours a day? Did they get that insulation of freedom of speech and I'm a comedian at all times?
It's a
in
card
perpetuity.
we pull out.
So he gets to do. I say we get to do videos. We get to go on podcasts and say the most heinous shit in the world, and then get to back away saying, "Hey, hang on a second, I'm a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
I get to do this." I'm not saying I know the answer to that, but I do question that a lot of these things that people are getting in trouble for seem to be in those formats where it's like, if you're on stage, Dave Chappelle doesn't want you to have phones on there.
Mm-hmm.
If he's going to the lengths to take phones out of his performances, and other comics are going on and doing things like that on their phones to literally everybody.
Sure.
Again, there's consequences to this stuff. And do we deserve to get all of the rights that comedians get when we're not standing on stage? Again, I don't know the answer to that, but it's something to think about.
Well, and it's interesting. There's actually a lot of research out there about when does a public generally accept humor that's topical towards something that's tragic or horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a lot of data polling around, like after 9/11, when you can joke about that, and historically Gilbert Gottfried really got himself into trouble right after 9/11. And there's these certain theories in comedy. One's known as the benign violation, where it's like this overlapping that it needs to be something benign. Nobody really does get hurt, but the violation is that there is some type of social norm that's being violated, but in a very safe way. And so, I don't know if Ari Shaffir or other comedians really construct or design some of their jokes and comedy with that in mind, but it really feels like when you're going to tackle very serious or immediate issues going on, that you probably want to be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about what you're trying to say, how people might respond to it.
Yeah.
The other thing about benign violation, though, that I think Ari Shaffir probably miscalculated was, in a lot of ways, his posting about Kobe, for some reason, I read it as it wasn't just, it felt kind of personal. I think he has a history of like bashing on Kobe and bashing on the Lakers.
You're right, actually, yeah.
And so this wasn't just, I do this with all comedians. It really felt that he was like personally attacking, that there was real hatred towards Kobe, rather than this being a commentary on Americans, like, when somebody dies, that's when you just worship them and you only remember the most positive sides of them. Like, to me, that can be a thoughtful commentary on our worship culture. I don't think that's what he was doing. It did feel very personal.
Yeah, that to me felt reverse engineered.
Yeah.
I thought. While I think he might have something to say about Kobe Bryant and the rape allegations that he had, I felt like that was a little bit more of a protection than it was him being outraged by that. So I don't know. And I also, as a comic, I don't want to judge too much also, because again, that's not my style of humor, but there's definitely times where I want to push the envelope. So I don't want that to be taken away from me either. But most of the time, I think I want to keep it on stage.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And whenever someone like Ari Shaffir or other comedians are tackling very sensitive topics that tend to generate a lot of uproar and protest, my brain immediately goes to like, well, what does that say? What does that mean? What's going on in our culture? What's going on in the auditorium or the theater? Why are people responding that way? Mm-hmm. So even like Ari Shaffir, I really can't, nor would I ever want to defend his video on Kobe Bryant.
Sure.
But if this is a shtick he's been doing for years, my brain immediately goes to like, okay, well then, why did all these other times that Ari Shaffir did this, that we didn't go in uproar? What is it about this time that it wasn't a benign violation? Mm-hmm. Why other times, if he's posted stuff immediately after other celebrities have died, have we just overlooked it, or we found it funny?
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't everybody, because I do agree, comedy in its purest form is not meant to be, mass consumed. It really is designed for a certain audience with certain tastes and humor.
And it should be performed live.
Yeah,
it should be consumed live. That's a big thing. I also think one of the differences from a lot of a lot of people who are getting called out are getting in trouble. I think someone like Dave Chappelle, he has such a large audience that I think he's protected a little bit.
Sure.
Younger comics or less well-known comics, I think, are at higher risk of being canceled, if you will.
No, I agree. I mean, you even think about last year the new SNL character or cast member that got
Shane Gillis.
Yeah, Shane Gillis, and he got fired before. And yeah, he didn't have a platform. I think the other thing that maybe even Shane suffered with, whereas Dave Chappelle is maybe a little bit more immune, is when someone gets in trouble, that oftentimes you look at the totality of what this person is saying and doing in their life in and out of comedy.
Yeah.
And it'd be hard pressed to not say that Dave Chappelle really has contributed a lot in the overall culture, in the arts, the marginalized community. And so even if people find his humor offensive, it's not their taste, or they think that it's just flat out wrong, it's hard to argue with a man that's given millions of dollars to schools.
Yeah.
He even talked about in his comedy show his transgender friend who took her own life, that he has set aside money for that comedian's child for their whole life. And so that's something I think when they went digging around Shane Gillis, they found other stuff where this is kind of his shtick. There's not a lot there that kind of counters, oh, this guy's a good dude, this is just a joke. It almost seemed like he was building his career on really demeaning or offending marginalized groups.
And he did it on a podcast.
On a podcast, yeah.
You know, again, we go back to that where it's not on stage. That protection. He wasn't afforded that protection as a comic, I think. I also think take someone like Dave Attell. He's one of my favorite comics, and he's one of the bluest comics you're ever going to see. He's amazing. You should see him. But you don't see him getting in trouble for these things. Yeah. That dude has some of the worst. It says some of the worst things on stage, but again, he's had an entire career of that. He also has had TV shows where he doesn't do that kind of humor. So I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, that's not your only thing that you do in comedy.
Well, he also has a certain experience level to say, I can't do this in this platform right now. I can't do this on TV. So there is some thought behind what you can and can't do. You know? Everyone wants to say, you can say anything you want all the time. Well, not really.
Well, I'd be remiss to not bring up, I got a comedian here on the show. We're a mental health podcast, exploring entertainment and culture through the lens of psychology and mental health. I want to hear from you a little bit of what you feel like some of the impact of being a stand-up comedian or being in the performing arts can have on a person's overall mental health and well-being. And you can either speak from your own personal experiences or just things that you've come across. More and more, our culture is really focusing on mental health and mental well-being, and they're really specializing, looking into, let's say, the mental health, consequences of being a firefighter, the mental health consequences of being, a teacher. And to me, I'm curious of what is the toll? What are the mental health aspects that you have to be mindful of being in a performing arts or being a live comic?
Again, very loaded question. There's a lot of comics who are who are watching this going, yeah, he's saying the right thing right now. This is because I think stand-up comedy and that the environment, the culture of it, from open mics to actual clubs and things like that. It's the island of misfit toys. It's where a lot of them go, something's a little funny about me. Something I don't see things in the same way. I was picked on. I have issues that were caused socially or just whatever it is. A lot of them tend to migrate to stand-up comedy. Okay. And I think partially because you're going to see like-minded people with similar issues. I think I do think that it's actually a social atmosphere for a lot of people who might be a marginalized fringe person, introvert, who might not feel like they're accepted in a lot of other places in their experience. So they go there and they know they're going to find that, and I think they do. So there's, I think, that side of it. I don't think every comic is like that. I don't necessarily feel like that's what drove me to doing comedy. But I do think there's a lot of people like that. And then the other side of it, so I came from, I'm a filmmaker when I'm not doing comedy. I think that as a writer, I would write scripts and things like that. At least I claim to be a writer. When I started doing stand-up comedy, the idea of seeing things and having to defend your point of view, going on stage and wanting to be truthful to yourself and be authentic, makes you really put a lens up to yourself, like put a mirror up to yourself, and really evaluate how do you feel about something. And that has been an interesting experience over the last 6 years of not just saying something and going about your day. It's you're going to say this and you're going to build on it, and you're trying to figure out what your voice is. So that to me has been, in terms of mental health, has been sometimes a little difficult to deal with. I've never evaluated myself so seriously and so truthfully. It's made me look at myself. I think that's another thing that comedians experience, I think, is really self-evaluation, who you are as a person, how do you feel about things. Being honest with yourself isn't always an easy thing to do. And I think the third aspect of being a comic is isolation.
Okay.
Being on the road a lot. I mean, I'll drive from Michigan to Florida and back up to New England, and that's a lot of time on the road, and it's a lot of time being isolated by yourself, and I think that can take a toll on you a little bit. I don't know. I think that's something to consider anyway as a comic. Like, what does that do to you?
Sure.
A lot of alone time, not having a workplace to go to with a lot of different people and that kind of camaraderie, and plus there's a lot of in that world there's a lot of drinking, some drugs, there's and plus mix that with being by yourself and then having people tell you you're great and how funny you are and great. There's a lot of peaks and valleys in that, I think, that can mess with you maybe a little bit, but I don't think it's an unhealthy place, or it doesn't have to be an unhealthy place. But I think seeing a lot of the demise of a lot of comics, a lot of big comics, and the directions that I think comedy and that lifestyle, I think, is you don't sleep on it. You got pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the comics, the well-known comics that we've seen, really, their lives take tragic turns. There's a lot, you reverse engineer, you do some investigation. There's a lot in their life and story that they were predisposed or vulnerable to some of the hardships and downturns. But also the life of comedy or performing arts certainly can create environments that sort of nurture some of that darkness or some of that really dysfunctional type of living. For me, I once, very early in my career, I did temp work as a salesperson, and I'm horrible at it. And I just realized, like, trying to convince somebody of something. Well, I knew it was a temp job, but I think I even made it more temporary before they made it even more temporary. But I think of, like, performing artists, filmmakers, writers, actors, stand-up comedians. Man, you got to have thick skin, because there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of having to put yourself out there and doors being closed, or sets that either you walk away thinking, man, that didn't land, that's not funny, or you get that response from the crowd of, like, you're not funny. That amount of rejection and that ability to keep at it because you believe it's your calling, or that you're destined to do this, or I got no plan B, like it's this come hell high water. But it's really interesting that in therapy, I see a lot of young people that are so sensitive and worried about failure and rejection on just some of these really, like, just everyday things. I can't imagine, your livelihood is built upon you're going to get turned down more than you're going to get built up, but you got to keep at it. Somehow you can't take it personally. You got to believe that the law of averages is in your favor. And I'm curious, maybe in that element, or even some of the other stuff you were talking about, the isolation, the travel, or stuff like that, like, how do you take care of yourself? What are some of the ways that you talked about, man, comedians, they could really go off the rails. What are those things that you do that help, that make you feel like you're able to kind of keep functioning and just be a healthy version of yourself?
Well, first I would say that the comedians are this, many, I don't want to, not too many broad strokes here, but a lot of comics are, one part crazy, narcissist, overconfident people, and coexist with crippling depression and thinking that they're garbage people and aren't good enough to be doing this. And it's a really, really interesting thing when you get to know someone well enough and you see those kinds of swings.
Yeah.
Because it's I see a lot of people who are like that. I see comics who've been doing this for a long time. I'll use Dave Attell as an example. And I worked with him where right before he's going on stage, he's literally beating himself up, not physically, but mentally, just saying, they're not. I used to be good. I'm just not good anymore, and I can't, do this and that. And then he goes out there to a damn near sold-out crowd and kills, and everyone is thrilled to see him. So, those things they're not just subject to open mic guys.
Mm-hmm.
This is to people who are super talented as well. Some of the things that I do, I have the luxury of having an incredibly supportive and close family.
Okay.
So I feel like I'm a pretty well-rounded person. My feet are on the ground, so I have that support when I need it, whenever I need it.
Yeah.
So that to me I have got a big leg up for comics in that respect. I would say that the other things that I do, I drink. I do, but that's not what makes me healthy, I guess. I don't know. I think trying to maintain the most normal lifestyle in the midst of doing comedy is getting up in the morning. I don't want to say eating right because I don't necessarily eat right, but I still want to try to have some kind of a normal day.
Sure.
Even if you are going to stay up late, I think moderation is probably an important thing. I try to work out. That's a lot of people laughing that you just heard. I think staying somewhat physically active, I think, is an important thing. I think that's kind of it for me.
Well, and it sounds like right from the get-go, that all falls under the umbrella that you don't buy into this, like a comics lifestyle has to be what oftentimes is sort of exaggeratedly showcased in our culture in terms of just up and down without you. You're talking a lot about the scaffolding of healthy living, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try to have structure, to be mindful of things in moderation. And that's a great starting point for people to recognize, I have late hours. How do I still try to get up and kind of live a full day? Bring some balance and structure and stability into a career and job that may have a lot of ups and downs and things of that nature.
And I think people beat themselves up about this stuff too. That's the thing that I see a lot is I didn't get up till 10. It's like, well, you were up till 3. So don't beat yourself up about that. You know what I mean? Still try to get up and do it. But you're right. There's this weird bravado in stand-up comedy that I see a lot, again, on varying degrees, where I land in the middle somewhere of career and experience or whatever, in the lower, middle. But I had a comic tell me one time, he's like, you're not a comic until you've gotten your first DUI. That's a statement that was actually said. And I said, that's the dumbest thing I could have ever possibly heard. So I think that culture of the Artie Langs and the these guys who got so immersed in drugs and the lifestyle of I gotta be this way. I gotta I gotta smoke cigarettes and get drunk and be ridiculous. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm a comic. You know, and I think maybe it's boring, but I think that's kind of changing a little bit.
I would hope so, especially if anybody wants to follow in the footsteps of Artie Lang. Just go online and Google Artie Lang and look at what Artie Lang looks like. And if anyone wants to aspire for that, we're going to put my professional credentials in the comments below so that you can reach out and seek professional help.
Now, to that point, I'm actually a big fan of Artie Lang. He's hysterical. Love him. He just tweeted today before we got here that he's 1 year sober.
That's awesome.
And which he's done over and over again. So, how difficult that is, but he's still trying.
Yeah,
he's still
he
trying
hasn't
to
given
clean
up
up.
the fight.
Yeah, which is amazing. So I don't want to necessarily totally beat up comics for that, but it's just you can be creative and funny and edgy and not be hooked on drugs and shit.
Not romanticize the entire comedy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions at this point? You guys are laughing over there, and I just don't know if I have kale in between my teeth or something.
You did the entire time.
Yes.
Never eaten kale.
I want to hear the bad stuff. I'm sure I'm getting.
No, it's all good stuff.
You can reach me at King Jason Allen for all complaints and.
Actually, I have a question for both of you. We'll start with Jason. Both of you touched on this, but just to end on a more lighthearted note, who are your favorite comedians and why?
Oh boy. Bill Cosby for his it's not.
For his family
Right?
values.
For his family value, yeah, that's right. I will say, actually, Bill Cosby was probably the first
He
comedian
was
that
the first. I had
yeah.
cassette tapes of his.
Yeah.
I also liked Michael
know.
Jackson when he was younger. Like
I
I
love
really
Michael
know how
Jackson.
to. I really know
I
how to
know.
pick them, right?
How do we separate, the art
right
from
now,
the artist?
right now, everybody's like, "Oh, please don't have Heatherly pick me as his favorite comic," because we see what his fan favorites turn out to be.
Yes. Oh, poor guys. Yeah, I would say my favorites ongoing are always Dave Attell, who I mentioned. I was a fan of Seinfeld for a long time. Maybe I don't see him as much. I love what he's doing even later in his career. I think guys like Bill Burr, even Louis. How do you not talk about comedy, not bring up Louis being hysterical, even though he's turned out to be a garbage person. I would say, man, there's so many. I mean, from new guys like Nate Bargatze and Kyle Kinane to guys who've been doing it forever. It's just it's a long list, I would say, of who my favorite comics are. But blue or clean doesn't matter. Brian Regan is one of the best comics ever, and he's as clean as you get. So.
Yeah, him and Jen Gaffigan, man, they just operate in that. It's wholesome, but it's funny. It's smart. I generally grew up loving Bill Cosby, and I had about 4 or 5 of his comedy tapes. So I'll just throw that out there. But some of my more recent comics, I love John Mulaney. John Mulaney is probably my favorite comic. I also really like Nikki Glazer, and I just find her style of humor and some of her kind of very adult themes to be really refreshing and disarming.
Yeah.
People around here know that one of my guilty pleasures is roasts. So whether it be comedy roasts or roasts off, anybody that's willing to put themselves up there and basically giving someone a free pass to just eviscerate me.
Yeah, I love it.
It's brave. It's offensive. It's dirty, and it's just one of those things that my brain just eats up. It's the McRib of comedy, right? It's not healthy for you, but it tastes good anyways.
Yeah, I love that stuff too. Actually, I love a good roast. I mean, they're speaking of Ari Shaffir and Big J Okerson, they do a roast at the Stand.
Yep.
You've seen that before? It's fantastic. It's the worst stuff you're ever going to hear said about anybody. It's really, really rancid stuff, and it's hysterical. So, if you know that going in, maybe that's all the difference.
I think that's a big key. Any more questions?
No, we're good.
Now,
All right.
Jason, where can people find you, follow you, and your work?
JasonAllenKing.com. I have all my full schedules up there. I've got videos up there. I do a bunch of web series and sort of funny videos. On Facebook, go to Jason Allen King. And Instagram and Twitter, it's at King Jason Allen, ALLEN. And come see a show sometime. I'll be funny, I promise.
Well, this has been great having you here.
Thanks.
I really learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you speaking both for your own personal experience, but also kind of giving us a little bit of inside glimpse into the comedy world. And so we'll definitely have to have you come back. We definitely have to keep in touch in a number of ways.
I would look forward to that, man. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Check out Shrink Tank for other content videos. You can go to our website for articles, polls, and more. We're exploring the intersection of culture and entertainment through the lens of psychology. For Jason Allen King, I'm Jonathan Hedderly. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.